You're listening to My Dinner with Gabe with Zav and Mark Borchardt. And today we're talking about the work of Alfred Hitchcock, which it's kind of like a boa constrictor trying to eat a minivan to talk about Hitchcock in 1 hour. It's like talking about the work of William Shakespeare in 1 hour. But I think it's certainly a pleasure, and I think there's no end to the little nooks and crannies we can go into on this subject. And I guess, Mark, explain what was the impetus for this week's show? Was there something that triggered it for you?
Yeah, well, no, it didn't trigger it for me. I think there seemed to be some forming consensus that a show on Hitchcock should be done. What had happened, or has yet to happen, is the release of the film, the biopic of Hitchcock at the theaters with Anthony Hopkins and Scarlett Johansson. And that, I think, possibly Gabe struck upon that. And then there recently was I think it was a HBO film concerning his relationship with Tippi Hedren within a month ago or so. Right. So it was that brought us to this, literally on this stage right now.
That brought us to this, yeah. Yes. And that makes, I was gonna say that. I was gonna say maybe that's the reason. And
well, you know what? It's an interesting question. It's a way to start a conversation, but it's unnecessary ultimately because Hitchcock would be and should be one of the subjects that we go through.
Absolutely. And just talking briefly about this biopic, which I haven't done, I haven't watched it yet, and we'll review that when it comes out. I have to say I'm trepidatious about anything along those lines.
You got fans already, and I'm sorry.
Well, let's see. Maybe this may be just a random call, or it might be Gabe. Let's see. Hello?
Hello, is this River West Radio starring Dr. LaPlay?
Yes, it is. Is this Gabe Van Handel?
This might be Gabe Van Handel of notoriety from My Dinner with Gabe.
Well, what a pleasure, Gabe. We just started talking about the Mr. Hitchcock's work. And
awesome.
And
good afternoon, Gabe.
Yeah, you're just in time. Let's put it that way.
Hey, Mark.
Hey, Gabe.
Down in wonderful Florida here, outside the St. Petersburg Yacht Club, looking out at the hefty yacht, the marina, looking at all these boats and all this sunshine. It's a little chilly for Floridians, but it's perfect late May weather for us Wisconsinians.
This is miraculous that we can speak like this and you can describe in such stunning and succinct detail your environment. We're out here on one of those beautiful fall days with somber overcast skies with leaves literally falling from the trees and rustling across the cement sidewalks and roads.
It'd be a good day for murder.
A good day for doing a Hitchcock show.
I like it. Yes, it would be. It'd be a very glorious day for some Bernard Herrmann score. I can't remember the name of the guy who did most of his credit sequences, but a nice.
It's a Saul Bass.
Saul Bass, a nice Saul Bass, maybe diagonal lines and.
Yes, sir. North by Northwest.
Yep, flying in on the reflection of a building with taxi cabs flittering by like little passing thoughts, and maybe.
Which is
running into some murder.
One of his most amazing films, North by Northwest. I know that an elitist may consider it a mere entertainment, but that's
no.
It's
no.
And we can actually, which should bring us around to Vertigo being named the best film ever made, Sight and Sound's every decade survey, which
Sam and I talked about on a previous show. We talked about the change of opinion, both scholarly and critical, and sort of in the mainstream consensus of how Vertigo went from a minor entertainment, how North by Northwest was considered a major entertainment in its day, a flickering thought in the public consciousness, but how Vertigo was dismissed and overlooked, and then over time sort of regarded by Stone College students as being this profound insight into the male psychosexual impulse.
Well, you know what? But that doesn't. Those ingredients do not should not allow something to be named the best film of all time. In fact, Vertigo is just merely actually a marginal film. I mean, once you analyze all of the potential films that could be up there, Persona, Faces, etc. It's like what? But
what? Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
Exactly. Thank you. Yes.
It doesn't make sense.
Thank you.
It has some amazing filmmaking in it. It has some stuff that in its time I think was kind of overlooked, but
well, I would argue that if you were to say Faces was the number one, the most important film, or if you were to say Persona was the most important film, it's like trying to peel an onion. You're never going to get there.
Right. Except I think in the case of Faces and Psycho, or not Faces and Persona, that there is, well, you can throw Psycho in there too for that matter.
Sure.
There's a texture that goes beyond Vertigo to those films. There's a sense of filmmaking.
Are kind of boundary breaking. I mean, like Persona. For me, what really establishes Persona as being something above the realms of a mainstream film and something that really branches into that realm of like otherworldly art is that shot right near the end, where there's the shot of the cameraman filming the movie.
Yeah, right. As they lift up, exactly. Yep.
And I think that shot, to me, exemplifies and sort of really states what filmmaking kind of is all about, and maybe what the idea of cinema is all about. I don't understand that movie at all, but I understand that it's fucking beautiful, and I feel the same way about a lot of Hitchcock movies. That the mysterious stuff, the stuff that's overanalyzed and overlooked at, is stuff that I would rather just not understand and simply enjoy.
Yeah.
So Vertigo being named number one sort of is just annoying to me, because I feel like all these other pieces, which are kind of considered these lesser entertainments, are perfect films. And we talked about this, Mark, the other week. I consider North by Northwest maybe his best film.
Thank you.
I mean, I would say it's his most entertaining, it's his most direct, it's his most well-made. I just find it just a perfect thriller and a perfect comedy.
Well, it's funny because I believe that Hitchcock's favorite film was Shadow of a Doubt.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Huh.
And maybe maybe it was because everything came together. All of his he maybe found his voice in Shadow of a Doubt. There are a lot of Hitchcock elements in Shadow of a Doubt. Not as many. North by Northwest stands apart a little bit to me. It does have some of the classic Hitchcock things. Mount Rush. Is it Mount Rushmore? But it doesn't have, for example, that the women characters in Shadow of a Doubt are much more complex to me than North by Northwest. But I don't want to go too far out on a limb with that.
And Shadow of a Doubt is also that they also did that for radio as well, so it's a neat radio drama.
And another thing that might contribute to that is the amount of fun that one has on the set while making a film.
Really?
And the environment.
Well, yeah. I think in the case of someone like Hitchcock, he is someone who, what we consider fun is when he's really at the, and obviously I don't know the man. I didn't live in his life or anything, but my sense of him is that he's someone who really lives in the craft, and when everything's hitting on all cylinders, that's when a person like that is happiest. That's when
I guess that's what I mean.
Yeah.
I guess that's what I mean. Like when he's like, this is exactly how I wanted this to look, and this is exactly what this performance is about, and this is exactly what this screenplay is about, and God damn it, we're doing it. And maybe it's not, and maybe it's not the best film in the world, but this is the best that we can do. And to me, that's a spiritual awakening. That exemplifies living a spiritual existence right there, or living a full existence, is being able to do the best you can, and know that especially working in a crew like that, with a group of people trying to manage that, and everyone turns to you, well, what are we supposed to do? And then you got 50 people that are staring at you, and knowing that not only did you tell people to do the best to the best of your ability, but they did the best of their ability.
Yeah.
I mean, right there, I guess that sort of right there is a perfect film, whether anyone else knows it or not. Or as a director, if you feel that is your best work, like we did the best we could, no one can take that away from you. That's pretty awesome. I think that he would pick that movie over something that I think would be a lot easier to say, like Psycho or Rear Window or something like that.
One of his later color, high-budget Hollywood films, you would think those would be his favorites.
Absolutely.
But then again, maybe Shadow of a Doubt, had it been made with, in Technicolor, with the same kind of budget, we would all be, fawning over it in the same way. So maybe you're right. Maybe it's from an experiential point of view. You can't really judge a film in the same way because we didn't make the film. We weren't the director on the set. We're the audience in the theater, and so we have a different experience. A lot different materials were brought to the screen that don't make any difference to his experience of making the film. So maybe it is apples and oranges in a sense to make.
And he is very obsessed with the idea of the audience, the idea of voyeurism and of watching. I mean, look at Rear Window. That film is all about like the experience of the idea of cinema. I mean, Jimmy Stewart is watching a movie. We're watching Jimmy Stewart watch a movie.
Well, also Hitchcock is someone who respected the audience a great deal. And that's how he's different from Cassavetes and Bergman in the sense that he really respected the audience. The audience he always was feeling the audience when he made a film. And so he wasn't just speaking from his heart the way that, say, someone like Fellini or these other auteur filmmakers do. He was really catering to the audience. He's really sort of a servant. He's sort of a servant to the audience, and he treats the audience with a great deal of respect, which is why his films are so popular. Or part of why his films are so popular is that he gives a great deal of respect to the audience. He doesn't talk above them and say, "Well, you're going to have to
you figure it out.
Do your homework if you want to understand what I'm doing."
Yeah.
And at the same time, he didn't pander to them. He did give the audience. Even the highly intellectual people, the cahiers de cinema type of audience, he also gave them a great deal of respect by not making stupid, dumbed down films. He didn't dumb his films down. He just he wasn't highfalutin about it.
Well, and I think that there's something about that kind of emotional intelligence that it can speak to an ordinary person and to an intellectual on different levels.
Yeah, I've been comparing him. Just spending time sort of immersed in Hitchcock for the last 5 or 6 days. The comparisons I draw with him are Mark Twain. And Mark Twain is one of the only people that really reminds me of Hitchcock in the sense that he's someone that you can that everyone can relate to. He's really there for the everyman, and at the same time, any highly intellectual filmmaker he's equal to as well. Another one is Kurt Vonnegut, sort of, to me.
Yeah.
I haven't thought of any other filmmakers.
I would definitely agree with the Vonnegut one even more.
Yeah. There's something kind of...
Frank Capra, for one, as a filmmaker,
Frank Capra, thank you, and Preston Sturges. I would even go Preston Sturges on that one, too.
Yeah, but you know what? Somehow, to me, there's something... Well, I'd have to think about that, but because it goes beyond just that they're accessible and to all people. There's something else that I can't put my finger on that's almost just a feeling, a little bit of an irony.
There's a sense of humor to it.
And a comfort.
And that's what I agree with. That's what I agree with on Vonnegut and Mark Twain, is that these were highly intellectual people who had... but also could enjoy laughter. These are people who
and
could
laughing
enjoy
at themselves a little bit.
laughing at themselves, exactly. And that's something that Hitchcock did very well.
And also think of how Twain is sort of a caricature of himself. You know, there's this sort of Twain caricature, and Hitchcock also has this caricature.
Absolutely, that's really true. Yeah.
Again, Zav presents us with some of the most brilliant and insightful perspectives. Thank you, Zav. It is intelligence, I think, is the end result, but it's the means. It's that there's a perception, the curiosity. Those are the means to the end. In the end, being intelligence, the end result.
Yeah.
I have something to ask you guys. What having read on Hitchcock, one thing that I've consistently read about him is that he was deathly afraid of being arrested.
Yeah, he was like around 5 years old when he was naughty, and to illuminate the error of his ways, his father took him down to the local police precinct, and they had him sit in the can for a few minutes, and that scared the bejesus out of him, and from then on he was primordially afraid of authority.
So if you're a parent and you want your child to be a great thriller director, you should throw them in jail for a couple minutes.
Well, all I know is I got lost one time at the zoo, and Cookie Monster found me, and a man in a large Cookie Monster suit, and there's a picture of me just sobbing uncontrollably, and my parents were freaking out because they lost me at the zoo. So maybe my quest for movies has something to do with.
Freud would have a field day with you and the Cookie Monster and all that.
God, I'm still lost at the zoo, just looking at all these animals. You know, maybe I'm just wandering. Maybe these movies are symbolic of these animals that I'm searching for, lost in this haze of.
Bless your heart, Gabe.
So, Gabe, I have two things. One is how long do we have you with us today?
About another 8 minutes.
Okay.
I'm outside of the St. Petersburg Yacht Club.
Okay.
I'm about to begin my employment at about 3 o'clock, and I've got to get changed in the locker room.
Okay. Well, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but maybe you could give us a quick 1 minute about this biopic that's coming out about Hitchcock.
Well, Hitchcock is going to be a possibly badass movie. We got Anthony Hopkins taking the reins. There's another movie that was just made for HBO about his relationship with Tippi Hedren, starring Marcia Gay Harden, and I cannot remember the guy's name, but he's been playing a lot of supporting roles. He's German, and that was an HBO movie that I think it's called A Man and a Girl. It's supposed to be just fantastic. This Hitchcock movie looks like sort of a good sort of atypical Hollywood biopic about an era, about a time where people are guessing and sort of fantasizing on what ifs and what could have been. But this film is supposed to take place right around the period that he made Psycho, and a lot of it's based on gestures and postures. It's been getting some good advanced reviews. I'd say about 2 out of 3, 3 out of 4 on average have been slight on their praise. Like, they've been giving it a pretty good 3-star review in general, but the consensus is that Anthony Hopkins has just dove into this role, that he's lapping it up, but that it's based on the idea of the images that we have as a collective consciousness of how we perceive these people, instead of exposing a new depth or exposing a new form of realism. It's entertainment, not sort of this shocking art. It's not the dark film. It's not the dark biography, or not even a dark portrait, or even a dark revealing story that it could have been. But it's sure to be some brilliant, bold entertainment, with a couple of nods and winks to film lovers or to connoisseurs of Hitchcock, and even just the everyday knower of Hitchcock, who maybe knows just his image based on the TV show, and just his public likeness, and a few odds and bits and tidbits that they've heard about him. But it is centered around his relationship. Mark, what's the woman's name?
Tippi Hedren. We're talking about the new one.
Yeah.
Janet Leigh, that Psycho, Scarlett Johansson's Janet Leigh.
Not Janet Leigh, the woman that he was dating, the woman that he was kind of involved.
Hitchcock was married.
Hitchcock was married, but I can't remember what her name is. But
he had an affair.
He had an affair with A woman, I'm not sure.
Is it an actress?
I do not know.
I know. I think he was messing around with his secretary potentially.
I believe that's who it is. Yes.
And that would be Joan Harrison.
Yes, that's okay. And it's played by Helen Mirren. So she's always fantastic and beautiful and lovely and gazing and full of wonder and awe and all those other sexy things that a 65-year-old British woman should have. But my only fear about it is what happened with the Iron Lady. That it's based too much on correcting the public's vision of what a figure looks like, based on a marketing campaign and an ad campaign in pursuit of money, and where the story, the plot, and all the meaning of the film comes second, which is exactly what happened with that film, and what seems to be the case with this movie. But
you could say that's probably true with the majority of biopics.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just look at that atrocious trailer for that Winston Churchill film that is coming out with Bill Murray. Ray is another example of that. I mean, and these are Oscar-winning films that I'm talking about here.
No, they always win Oscars.
but it's just like, if we just touch on the right emotional notes, and if we just touch on the right cues, and if we just touch the right buttons and get the right director to say that, the right actors to say the right things. We don't actually have to say anything.
Yeah.
But if we just go through, it's a very emotional, very staged, and very over-prepared episode of SNL without any laughs. Fucking ass.
Great work, Gabe. And now, to digress, here's not an everyday knower of film, but someone that you certainly know, David Thompson. And remember, he came out with that book, That Moment of Psycho, which I read, which is an incredible, essentially 150-page essay of his outlook and theory on Psycho. So you being a great fan of David Thompson, pick that book up and read it, sir.
Oh, I will.
There's things to agree with, things, there's illuminating, there's things that, great. And
David Thompson, is that the Thompson Bordwell?
Yeah. No, that's Biographical Dictionary of Film is David Thompson.
Okay.
And Bordwell's our man from Wisconsin.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
But you were saying there's someone in Milwaukee, sorry, Gabe, someone in Milwaukee who's a Hitchcock aficionado.
Patrick McGilligan. He actually wrote a thick tome on Hitchcock, which is yet to be read, which will be read certainly.
I've been picking away at little pieces of that, and I'll tell you, he is a film scholar to be reckoned with. He does not screw around. He does not worry about entertaining. He does not worry about pleasing. He is only interested in ifs and truths. And if it is for the serious film scholar, it is for the unsubstituted film scholar. And at grueling lengths, his books are they do not cut corners, and he is someone interested in truths, not theories or postulates. He is concerned with hard evidence and hard ideas.
Well, I'm reading his biography on Wisconsin's Nicholas Ray, which is a great book, very well written. And so I actually had met him, got him to sign both books on Ray and Hitchcock. He was over at our great Boswell bookshop.
Beautiful.
So
beautiful. Well, I got to get rolling, guys. I got to get into work here.
We hear that Floridian breeze calling you inward.
God, I would love to be able to just sit and talk. I miss you guys. I miss Wisconsin.
We miss you.
Hopefully, we can have you on next week.
Oh, that'd be great. I'll
we'll
try to get the habit of just calling in before I come into, of calling the show before I come into work. But I'm glad. Thank you guys so much for keeping it up and keeping your spirits alive and keeping this show going. My dinner with Gabe, my dinner without Gabe. Film scholarship is something that the three of us all greatly respect, and I hope that the listeners are as entertained as we are by doing the show. So thank you very much, and I will see you guys later.
Okay, Gabe.
Bless your heart, Gabe.
All right, bye, guys.
Bye.
Beautiful, and thank you, Zav, for allowing all this technology to facilitate that triumvirate of passion.
You're welcome. Where should we go from here? We kind of, I think maybe we should start at the
He
beginning.
was born in 1899. And no, he was.
Yeah, he's born in the previous century.
Correct.
And
died in 80.
Yeah, died in 1980, and somehow I guess I do remember, but I guess we were fairly young, like teenagers at that time.
Which time? Oh, the 80s?
At his death, at the time of his death.
Yep.
I probably knew Hitchcock, but I wasn't, immersed in him. But he got his start very early on. He worked in, I believe, went to engineering school, and then got into film, not through the tabloids, but he actually got right into the trade magazines. He was, obsessed with the real inner workings of how movies were made, and that's one of the things that makes Hitchcock such a great filmmaker. A little bit like, I was going to say James Cameron, and maybe James Cameron's a good example.
Yeah, it's a good
someone who
example.
really gets into the mechanics,
the nuts and bolts.
Yeah,
of
the
it.
nuts and bolts of it. Also, a fellow British filmmaker, Kubrick, is also someone who really got into the mechanics, had certain lenses designed and so on for
Barry Lyndon
for his filmmaking, and got in making titles.
Got in making titles, but he also had a variety of jobs too. I mean, he's an assistant director. He did a number of. He was willing to do anything. He was really into it, and he was willing to do anything. In fact, that's how he met his wife, Alma Revel. She was also she was a film editor and so forth, and it was
a script girl, which I think at the time a script girl was an editor. It was an interesting thing, but the script girl, which is a very obviously kind of misogynistic title.
Yeah, they don't use that anymore. That's continuity or script supervisor.
Which is it's a very interesting thing. I mean, that's a whole other thing, is that why women are considered to be sort of have a higher aptitude for editing and for the sort of what would you call the minutia or the meticulous job of keeping track of all the little details.
Well, that would
making sure they stay in order.
Yeah, that would lead one to believe that that's someone with a more serious take on life, with less time for frivolous expenditures and so forth. So when you're concentrating on something, and you obviously it's genderized and so forth, and the way that you put it with the script girl and so forth. But I want to also say that she was going to write his screenplays, which is a huge aesthetic thing, and but yeah, they got married at a young age, and they were together ever since. So, and what's interesting in the English film industry back at the in that period in the teens, 20s, it really never got off the ground in a hugely successful way, and there was a lot of American import films that actually carried financial success. So what had happened when Hitchcock made his first film, The Mountain Eagle, which is not extant, it no longer exists to our knowledge. They did that in Germany, in the Hollywood of Europe, Berlin, and Hitchcock would actually study his craft in Germany as well, and so on and so forth.
Yeah,
and then came back to England. And, he's highly influenced by like a Fritz Lang, and Murnau and that. So. In Germany.
Yeah, and it's interesting in this. I listened to this, and anyone who's listening, if you go to a search for his interview with Truffaut, and that is sort of a famous it took over multiple days, this super long interview that Truffaut did with Hitchcock. One of the questions Truffaut asked Hitchcock was about why England doesn't have much of a film history, much of a reputation in cinema. Now it does, but at that time, in 1964, when the interview took place, Britain was really only known for Hitchcock and Chaplin, and not much else. And so Hitchcock explained it that for the British, cinema was considered sort of maybe because theater had such a strong place in British culture, especially in the higher echelons in the higher culture, in the wealthier classes, it was considered lowbrow to even appear at a movie house. So it was considered a lowbrow form of entertainment. He said that he called actors cattle because to him they never really gave their full heart to to filmmaking.
Well,
they
Hitchcock
were
was never
theater people,
right? But Hitchcock was never an actor's director. I mean, I think they're more like chess pieces in the schematic of his,
right?
You know, of his
or like
dramatic narrative.
Like puppets in a puppet show.
So I think there's other directors obviously that are in love with their actors.
Sure.
That's
Cassavetes.
Right. That's the lifeblood of the piece is the actors, the humanity of it.
Right.
So and then diametrically opposed to that idea is Hitchcock, as we just.
And there are other a lot of directors who really emphasize the actors and vice versa, but it's still, you know, that aside, he talked about how the actors themselves would, for example, want to get off an hour or two early so they could go have a long meal before they go do their actual theater matinee. So like doing the film, being on a Hitchcock film in those days, in the early days of when he was making films like The Lodger and so on, the actors were difficult people to work with. They didn't take cinema seriously in England. And that's part of why he was so attracted to the American studio system, because he you know, cinema was taken more seriously in this culture, and you know that has a lot to do with our economy and space and everything else.
Excellent. And then now, in speaking of like The Lodger from 26, which is obviously a silent film. Mm-hmm. He did a number of silent films that were a mixed bag. A lot of them took place in a contemporaneous social milieu. It was about, you know, the workings of society at that point. So he had hits and misses in that era. There's some good films. There's some, you know, mediocre films and so forth. And then you have The Lodger based on Jack the Ripper, which is, you know, obviously a suspense film. And
right.
And then, you know, you leave that era, and he's still in England, and he gets to America for Rebecca.
Yeah,
over by Selznick.
Which is still, Rebecca was still an all British film. It was made in America, but everything takes place in England. All the actors are British, and so it was kind of a hybrid where he made an English film in the States. But he talks about how Rebecca was different in the sense that because he was in America, all of a sudden he was able to play to a world audience, and that when he was in England, he felt more constrained, more in a bubble in his filmmaking abilities. So he really, it wasn't that he loved America as a whole, as an entire culture, but he really was anxious to get his hands on the studio system in Hollywood, that he could use that. He knew how to use that tool of the Hollywood studio system, and he adapted to it, you know, just very like a fish in water or whatever you call it.
So, let's see, I just actually saw Rope again last night from 1948, and I mean, this is just out of the blue. I mean, you pause, so I just now I'm bringing up something.
Well, like I was saying before, it's like a boa constrictor trying to eat a minivan.
And I wanted to point out a couple films that had very diverse techniques. One is Rope, where he shot everything in one long take and disguised the breaks. Yes. In film by going behind someone's back. And for Dial M for Murder, which was shot in 3D, one of the things that those two films have in common, Rope and Dial M for Murder, is that they're based on stage plays. Rope by Patrick Hamilton, who did the famous Angel Street theater play, and Dial M for Murder is by Frederick Knott. And actually, Dial M for Murder is a wonderful play to read. You know, sit in your easy chair on one of these cold November nights with your coffee and enjoy a stage play. Rope is from 29. I want to point this out. There is in the end, there is a very didactic exchange of dialogue about executing people, murdering people, that you are have this intellectual savvy which allows you to execute people, to murder people, and so on and so forth. And I was like, whoa, this is just like a few years after the discovery of the Holocaust, man. This is way too on the nose. This is almost uncomfortable. And so then I researched Patrick Hamilton and saw that Rope came out in the stage play in '29.
Okay.
So I don't know if this was part of it back in the 20s, because there was huge precedent to bring this idea out about who has a right to murder whom and so forth. And it was just too close of a time period to the horrors of World War II to bring that on screen. So I was a little bit. Do we need any moralizing about it to know it was wrong? It's kind of uncanny.
Hitchcock talked about this. This came up in the interviews with Truffaut as well. Truffaut talked about. He made a comparison between. What's the film with the good and evil on the hand on the?
Oh, you're talking with Mitchum, man.
Yeah, the Robert Mitchum film.
Yeah, it was remade, Cape Fear. Or no, you're talking about Night of the Hunter.
Yeah, Night of the Hunter, which Cape Fear is related in some ways.
Yeah, they're quite
Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm digressing, but that just because you brought up the morality thing. Truffaut brought up Night of the Hunter to Hitchcock and said, your films are a little bit like Night of the Hunter, where you have the one fist says good, the other fist says evil, and then the two hands sort of struggle together, but good always wins. And Hitchcock corrected him and said, no, actually, morality is never a point in my films.
Well, no, that's crazy, man, because they overindulge with morality. They reek of this moral terrain. But it's an odd thing to say.
For Hitchcock, he doesn't moralize. He uses moralizing as maybe a vehicle in his films, but his films actually don't moralize. He might have been forced to moralize in some.
Just by the production code itself.
Yeah,
because
exactly. You can't have, say, Psycho end where Tony Perkins ends up winning.
Right.
I mean, you could nowadays. You could maybe, but
right
back
about that
then
time, you probably could get away with it. The Psycho came out in '60, made in '59. So, but with Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf and a few other films, that started to crack around that time period where you not only in the use of obscenities, but because along with that you could start getting away with a lot more, and you probably didn't need a righteous moral conclusion at that point. But you're right, prior to Psycho and so on and so forth, you darn well better have.
Yeah, and that's another thing Hitchcock talked about a lot, is that he would be using he'd have certain actors like Cary Grant or some famous British actors in his earlier films, and if he couldn't cast certain people as bad guys. You weren't allowed to cast a Cary Grant as a bad guy. It would be it would be forbidden.
Well, To Catch a Thief, isn't he a cat burglar?
Well,
I'm just being. Yeah.
No, you might be making a valid point, but
I know what you're saying.
The system was still against. You don't just have free reign in those especially in those years, but even to this day, I'm sure each one of these people is like a brand, and you have to. Or for example, maybe Cary Grant, you present him with the script, and then he's afraid, what will this do to my career if I'm a bad guy? Nowadays, I think people have seen enough cases where it actually works in your favor to suddenly be, completely out of your type, to do something that's uncharacteristic of the character that the public mind thinks of you as, But I don't know. It's just an interesting thing that these films are all highly affected by the constraints of the studio system. But Hitchcock was masterful at working with that kind of like extreme status quo. He was able to bring perversion into extremely sort of suffocatingly tight tightly controlled circumstances.
Rope. How more tighter can you get than that? One set, man.
And daring. I mean, you just mentioning Rope and Dial M for Murder. Here's a person who was making a 3D movie. It's not some monster ghoulish, things coming out at you.
It's the
off the screen. It's a film that stands on its own, and the fact that he made it 3D was just like an extra, a plus. The idea of doing a film where you just roll an entire reel for each take is unheard of to this day. I mean, nowadays people don't use reels, but the idea of doing a 5 or 6 minute long shot, well, I guess it would be 4 minutes.
Well, maybe. No, dude, it'd be about 10 minutes.
Oh, yeah, 10 minutes for a 1,000-foot roll.
But also remember, and
just running an entire 10-minute take is unheard of. I mean, normally you have a cut every 10 seconds in a film. So he was doing these takes that were just insanely long, That's just one. And then other experiments that he did, with... he came up with all kinds of cool trickery and so on with his films. He was very much very adventurous in what he would do with film.
Yeah, a lot to do with technique, and I think, I could have made a pretty bad statement about Hitchcock, and maybe I didn't think it up. Maybe it was from somewhere else. I think that he was a second-rate director who made marginal films, and I could have said that at some point, but I can't say it now. He's a technician above being a craftsman. The man who knew too much. There's sometimes a lot of just cantankerous compositions and lighting that don't lend themselves to the persuasion that he's this perfect craftsman, but he's definitely an audacious technician.
Yes.
And makes you very aware of that.
Yeah, he would come up with really cool ideas, like Strangers on a Train? Or it's one of the films that takes place on a train where the woman is switched out with another woman.
Oh yeah. I just saw Strangers on a Train. That's not it. And man.
But he loved to do well. That's a Hitchcock trope is to switch, where people get switched identities. And
is that a Hitchcock film or a noir film?
No, it's a Hitchcock film for sure.
There was just a noir film we were talking about where there's some funny business with identity of the women on the train. So there's Strangers on a Train.
Miss Frome, remember she writes Frome in the window with her finger, in the.
Are you sure that's Hitchcock, dude?
Yes. Oh, yeah, for sure. But I can't remember the title of it.
North by Northwest takes place also on a train.
But this is earlier. This is black and white.
Black and white.
Anyway, I'll look up his filmography in a second. But the reason I brought it up is there's a point, and then people might have heard about this before, but there's a point where there's poison in a glass of water or a glass of juice or wine or something. And what Hitchcock did was he wanted to really emphasize the poison in that glass.
Oh, you're talking about he's going to put a light in the glass?
Well, he did. That's one time he did it with poison in a glass of milk. He came up with the idea of putting a light bulb inside the milk.
That's
so
right.
The milk would brighten up. And this is black and white, so, it probably works better in black and white than in color, but so in order to emphasize that glass of milk on the table, he put a light bulb in the milk. In this other film, what he did was he wanted to emphasize the glass of poison, and what he did was he created a giant glass the size of a barrel, and like a 3-foot sized glass, and he just put it right up in the shot, and that way he still had the depth of field. It looked like the glass was it looked as if the camera was right up to the glass and the people were far away, but actually the glass was right next to the people, and so the glass was in focus with the people, and that way you didn't have that problem of having a depth of field issue. That's just one example, but he would come up with the coolest ideas. That seemed like one of the things he was really great at.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of those ideas were successful, and some weren't. When you have the process shot of the detective falling backwards on the stairs in Psycho, it doesn't hold as well, and then that's one of those ingenious ideas. But you've fascinated me. I've got to figure out what those films are.
The thing is that when you talk about the guy falling, that image just sticks in my head.
Absolutely.
It really does. Or like the Vertigo shot that's so famous, where he had the camera
zoom in, pull out. Yeah.
Zoom out and rack forward, or track for dolly. I forget what they call it, dollying. You're moving the camera physically forward while you're zooming out, or vice versa.
Yeah, you can call it tracking or dollying, right? Where you track or dolly one direction and you zoom in or out the other direction to counter it.
And at the time, that was a very hard thing to do, and the studio wanted to charge him $50,000 to do that one shot. But then they figured out a way around it. It ended up being $19,000, and we're talking about 1950s.
Right.
So that was a huge amount of money just to do that one shot. But Hitchcock was drunk one day at some event, like a concert, and he had that experience of feeling like he was losing his sense of perspective. And he wanted to recreate that in a film way, and he kept working on it, and that's where he came up with that technique.
And it's interesting, though, that because Vertigo would be like I don't know, 58, I think, or North by Northwest 59. I wondered, though, if that technique hadn't been used prior to Vertigo.
Well, I think that the zoom lens was not, and I don't know what year the zoom lens was actually invented, but it must not have been, because they needed to charge $50,000. Part of it is these cameras are huge instruments at the time. They're not, they're as heavy as a human body, and at the same time, you have a camera operator and all these other things connected to the camera, and then you're doing this movement at whatever angle, like it might have been going down. Oh yeah, finally what Hitchcock figured out was he would make, instead of physically moving the camera and doing kind of what we just described, he realized he could make a mock-up of the set because there were no actual human beings in the shot. And so then he just made a miniature, and that ended up being $19,000. But
it's an expensive miniature, man, for what, a stairwell or something?
It is one of those things, now we take it for granted. I mean, anyone who's got a camcorder can do it, but I think at that time it was unheard of. It had never been done. Hitchcock was the first person to figure it out with other people, how to make that visual effect.
Wow, I'm going to look into that.
Well, we're getting towards the end of the show here. We have about 11 more minutes, but
Well, I mean, I would contend that his last 5 films are stinkers, though I will give Marnie another shot. I mean, Family Plot's atrocious. Prior to that, those 5 is The Birds and Psycho. And
oh my gosh, yeah. Amazing film.
Yeah, and just even moving beyond Psycho, which is the obvious, I just have a growing appreciation for The Birds. It's a beautiful film, especially with the 2 women on the porch and that mysterious gaze out into the horizon has always stayed with me.
Yeah, I mean, The Birds is an amazing undertaking. The idea of, I mean, really, has anyone done anything similar? I can't think of it. I mean, nowadays maybe you'd find some similar, because everybody's trying to do some new take on horror.
And I'm really sorry for interrupting here, but I'm just thinking now, like, you have The Birds, which is, animals attacking. The 50s obviously are these mutant ones, via atomic.
The bees.
Wait a second. I was getting to that. The 50s are these huge things, right? Because they've interacted with atomic energy, whether it's a bomb or whatever, become these huge things.
Yep.
But in The Birds, it's the first time we have possibly the first time what we have as basically looked upon as a benign animal, harmless, right? Birds.
Right.
And obviously that they commit these atrocious attacks on people.
Right.
And then in the 70s, you do have where seemingly benign animals rampage. You know, where the bees, like you say, the swarm.
Yeah.
All of these films where these, you know, and it ends with Stephen King's Cujo. You know, where a dog, you know, is the villain and so forth. So with the birds, instead of these huge monsters, you now have proportionate, seemingly benign animals who are doing the ravaging instead of these.
Well, also Hitchcock did something really cool with the birds, which I think is even, you know, he was probably one of the first people to do a film anything remotely like that, you know, in terms of just the plot. But he made it a point not to make the birds screaming and angry. He made them quiet. Like they were biding their time. They knew
Initially,
right? They're quietly just observing, and they're quietly. It's like they know they have the upper hand, and they don't need to lose their cool. And then one of the other things is it was a notorious film because he didn't use darkness. It was all daytime shots, all daytime. So he wanted to make a horror film that took place in the daytime. And that was also very ambitious again, like a kind of a pioneering idea.
Zav, you're breaking my heart because you've hit upon such two beautiful things. Like you said, the birds quietly biding their time. You know that of this growing suspense, this growing apprehension. You know, something's going. It's just amazing. And then second of all, the horror in broad daylight, we're using dark and so on and so forth. Just two beautiful concepts that, you know, which could be thematic for anyone's journey if they were to make a film and to remember these two elements. And I'd like to make a note of that. So thank you, Zav.
Another thing that's interesting with the birds and kind of interesting about Hitchcock in general, you could almost do a whole show about just this, and I wouldn't be good at it because I'm not.
You'd be brilliant at it.
I'm not that well studied in Hitchcock or in sort of how women are represented in film, but Hitchcock has a very interesting relationship with women in his films, and how women are represented. It does, you know, definitely does represent that time period, the way women were objectified and so on. But in another way, sometimes I see Hitchcock as really understanding women. And being able to, I don't know. I don't want to step out of my own ability to really analyze this, but I think he has a really interesting take on women in his films and the way he represents women. It's just it's kind of more for whatever people have to say about it. He definitely he brings complexity to women in a way that you don't see too often in other films of that time period.
You're right. That would be a whole show because there's such a range too of not only who they are, the situations they're in, from Kim Novak to Janet Leigh to Tippi Hedren to Ingrid Bergman and Grace Kelly, so on and so forth. So you have this whole plethora of these women and circumstances, and you're right, it would be a whole show.
Yeah. And it's not just the leading ladies, but also the other women in the films. Sometimes they're the more fascinating ones. You know, the women who are not considered the beautiful women, the women who are more average. Or
you're not talking about his daughter, Patricia Hitchcock.
Oh, well, she did appear in North by Northwest, or
predominantly in Psycho at the insurance agency, or at the agency, real estate agency, what have you. She is the counterpoint to Janet Leigh, and Patricia Hitchcock does a wonderful acting job. She's also in Strangers on a Train as a nice role, and so when you talk of this and the tiers of these women's existence, the plateaus of their existence in these films, and he has archetypal sub-characters, even like with Rope, with the older lady and so forth. That's actually a hardcore archetype, and someone with Patricia Hitchcock, that's an interesting character that exists in his films. But again, like you say, man, you could do a show on that.
Yeah.
So you're messing with dials. I feel that we have very waning time on our hands.
We still have about 4 minutes.
Okay, excellent. Shoot, man. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say another subject that you could do a whole show about is how Hitchcock has influenced other filmmakers throughout history. There are so many people who have.
De Palma.
Yeah, Brian De Palma is one of the more notorious. The Bond series, I believe, is or kind of influenced by Hitchcock's style. He's a little bit like, maybe I'm going out on a limb here, but a little bit like Bob Dylan in that sense of...
You are going out on a limb.
In the sense of being sort of pioneering his own way, doing his own thing, and then a lot of other people sort of mimicking his way.
Yeah, that I could agree with that parallelity, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, it is. If it's fall, it is a good time to listen to Dylan, John Wesley Harding, and Nashville Skyline, and Blonde on Blonde, and so on and so forth, man.
Yeah.
You digressed, man.
Well, I was gonna say, you earlier on were talking about him as making certain movies towards the end of his career that weren't the greatest, some of his movies in his early career that weren't the greatest, but that's part of being human, that people, it takes a while to break into the industry. Hitchcock says that his first film really was, I believe, The Lodger.
Wait, what's the first film you said?
He says that, even though I believe it was his sixth film.
Yeah, that was.
But I believe that from what I remember, he said that he considers The Lodger the first time he really made a film.
Wow.
And before that, he's just kind of figuring out how to make films, or figuring out how to make his own films, because especially people like Hitchcock who worked within the industry, which is a very hard thing to do. They might have been making very astute films, but actually they're just kind of going along with what they're told to do in a certain sense. Even though they're the director, there's still a higher up kind of. It's a very hierarchical situation with financiers and all that. And then towards the end of your career, that's just generally true with most people. Things, you get a little older and
you're talking about like the Stones with their glory days, those half dozen albums in the late 60s and early 70s. And no, you can't go back to that, and Hitchcock couldn't go back. There's a 1944 version of The Lodge, not by Hitchcock, but by someone else, but that's something to check out as well. And yeah, North by Northwest, Psycho, just great films, American art, great stuff. He's made essentially like 53 films. I know they did a German version of Murder.
He has a huge filmography.
Yeah.
Huge. Yeah, I mean...
But you know what? It's not unlike Woody Allen.
I was going to say, yeah, Woody Allen.
So it's not like... there's some people that they do a film every year, every other year, and you live long enough, you're going to accumulate that statistic.
You'll have quite a few. And the parallels with Woody Allen, I would say there's some parallels, even though I think Woody Allen's less... Well, he's very innovative, but Woody Allen really is a writer. He's really a writer who makes movies, where Hitchcock was really just an innate filmmaker. He was born to make films. In fact, he talked about when he reads books, he just really saw them as images. He talks about, and he's a master of using the language of cinema, almost defining the grammar. If you can take cinema and turn it into a language, almost like a text language, and then he would be someone who actually learned how to punctuate that and work it in ways that I think very few other filmmakers have ever done. He's really a pure filmmaker. And on that note, Mark, we're running out of time, but it's been a pleasure as usual.
Thank you so much, Zav, and thank you so much, Gabe.
Yes.